And so in this step, we need to soften up the chalk a little bit, get it looking more like this, a little bit melted or molded. So let's run a histogram scan on this, not this one. Histogram scan, that's one. And we just want to find sort of our edges here. Something like that. Yeah, let's try this. And then we'll blur this. That's too much. Can up the quality of that as well. Do invert grayscale. And then we'll do a non-uniform blur. And the non-uniform blur is like a regular blur, but it takes a mask input. So now we're going to use this as a mask for here. And we're going to set down our distance to be maybe a little bit more. And that looks a lot better. You can see if we can just massage this one. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. We can tweak some of these quality settings on this non-uniform blur. All the way at the bottom here, just drag up the samples. Maybe we want to dial this one back a bit. It's 175. Okay, good. Save that. And now we're going to work on breaking off a couple of these pieces. I think the way I want to use that, or the workflow I want to use for that, is the flood fill node. So we're going to use this histogram scan again. We're going to just make this really tight like that. As tight of a mask as possible. And this one we're going to run into flood fill. And the flood fill is going to create elements out of all these divided segments. As we can see here, we're losing some, so I need to go in and adjust my settings here until we have all of our tiles represented. And then we're going to do a flood fill to grayscale. And as you can see, nothing shows up because we need an input. So we're going to go in and create a little shape node here. And we can use a disk, just arbitrary size. We're going to run this one into a transform so we can move it around. And then we're going to hook that up to here. So now you see we selected these spots. So imagine if there's a little pivot point in the center of all these. So the ones that they are touching are the ones that are going to get selected. So if we actually blend these two together just like this. So here we have nothing selected, but it's because we don't have enough tiles there. So what I want to do here is double click this, select this single. So we just want to select the 4 on the side here. let's say that's 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. And then we can, on this node, we can say that this shouldn't tile, absolute no tiling. And that leaves us just these guys. We can delete this node because I was just using it for preview. So this is the stuff we're going to use here. This one still has the little gaps in between, so we're going to use the distance node to just grow that influence, so to speak. So it's going to take all the white pixels and grow them by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 distance steps. I don't know what that entails, but as you can see here, you can use this one to grow a lot. So back to something around 5. Can move this up to here. We can actually frame this as well. Just so we remember when we need to come back to this graph later, just what is this part doing? So we can say select pieces. And then what we need to do is move it up into position. I want to use my own custom node, but I'm gonna include that in a download for you guys so you can follow along. And we're going to use clouds 2. We just want to warp this a bit. So we say 3 directions, and we're just lowering our intensity here a bit. This cloud creates a little too much noise, so we can use this, let's see, filter and dilation node. This one is free on, I think, Substance Share. You can find it here. And this one we just want to set to dilation to 5. And we can use a normal map node here too, just preview what it's doing. So this is what our node was doing here for our directional warp. You see it's adding a bunch of noise here, but with this, it killed that little piece of line we had in between that we didn't want, but it also kind of chunks up the edges a bit more. So we can remove that. So now with this we can create our separated pieces. By just multiplying that. And we can do the same here where let's move that over. Here we can subtract that. And we see that it doesn't exactly match up, so we'll do a little transform here. So it sort of matches how it would break up or break off. Should do the same here actually. tighten this up a bit. Also move it off. Because we don't want the right side of this edge to be broken. Something like that. So now we have our two components. That whole piece snapped off. And now for this piece, we can actually go in and rotate and place this piece. And we'll set this one to no tiling, because you see it starts showing up down here again. There we have it removed. And we can just combine these two just to see the composition. So if it's actually now they're sticking into each other. So let's place this one a bit off. Something like that. So next step here for the chocolate bar is that we want to crack off this top and pour out some caramel from that area. So let's see what how we can do that. And let's just organize this a bit. And we can add a comment here. Oops. Let's add a frame here actually. Frame. We do first we remove these pieces and then we added them back in. So we're gonna borrow this, or make a clone rather, and we're gonna use this cells 4, but we're gonna say color source is an input image. So this is just a cell noise, but we want to drive it by this image, just so we get kind of like an interesting crack edge there. And on the cells node, you can set this down to, let's do half or 18 or something like that. We can adjust. Don't know what's going on with substance here. I have the wrong icon for all these. Do something like that. And to eliminate, if there's any grayscales in here, we just run a histogram scan through this and just kill those. Because the way I move this around, sometimes I get some kind of half gray areas. And we don't want like these kind of holes either. So we want like a nice kind of solid edge, if we can get one. And then we're going to run this through a bevel node. And just set this down to something low. Can add a little bit of smoothing on here. And then actually we'll break this one out and we'll do this before we combine them back in, so we can change this. So what we want to do here is we want to blend this on here. Subtract. And basically here we just want to like scale or manipulate this one to crack that top piece off. That looks all right. We can move these guys over here. The next step here is to find just these pieces here. So just this part here, because we're going to use that to create this pouring caramel. So how do we do that? I think we'll start with like a blend node here. I'll do a histogram scan of this. And we'll do subtract of that. No, you do like an invert grayscale here. Okay, so that's what we wanted. Essentially now we capture this little area here. And this thing we can put through a non-uniform blur, grayscale. And this guy, so non-uniform blur will take this shape and just, if we look at the normal output of this, it's like an inner shadow type effect. So this one is like an angle, but this one would be like a blob shape. And then from this, we'll run this through a histogram scan. Just make it a little bit smaller. Yeah, something like that. Now we'll run this through a non-uniform blur again. But then we're going to invert this thing. And increase the samples. And we can pick a direction here. If we use this asymmetry here, you can see how we kind of push this blob away. Let's try like 6.5 or something. And then we do another histogram scan because the values are getting too dark. looks pretty good. And then we'll do another non-uniform blur to kind of build another blob shape here. And we can move the weight around with this. And we want it to be biggest closest to this. So we use the same direction as before. And we can up our samples. We need a bit more, I think. Let's try that. Let's take these guys and move them off. Now we just want to combine this back into our composition, and we're going to use the height blend node. And we're going to put this in the top. And maximize the contrast. Here we can sort of define the height of this, but let's just leave it at 0.5. We can lower a bit, 0.45 maybe. And the cool thing about the height blend node is that you get this mask. So we have like one mask for the chocolate and then for the caramel. It's the inverse of that. Now we can actually go back and sort of massage this a bit, depending on like how much sort of caramel we want. Yeah, the height is a little bit off there. Just play with these values while looking at your composition. That looks all right. Let's go back here because it's looking like we get this NVIDIA logo here since we're using subtract. Let's see if there's another blend mode that works better, or if we just need to go in and blur that area. So subtract would just lower those values. Maybe if we use min darken instead. Oops. That one cut off a bit too much, too sharply. Let's try the min darken again, because I think that's the way to go. We just manipulate this part. We'd probably just, I don't like what that looks like. That looks way better. There. So yeah, it's a little bit of tinkering to get it to look right. And now for just more preview purposes, we can just clone this and put a blend here. Connect these two guys. And we can use this little mask here. Set a different color on the caramel, and we can do the same for the roughness. I'll do this and that. That's pretty good.